Audrey. Welcome back.
Hey Beth, how are you?
Well, I hear you've got some news about biologic.
Yes, I was just finally approved through insurance to start something that is specifically made for lupus. And it is, I guess there's very minimal side effects of it, but very, very beneficial for lupus patients. So I'm looking forward to getting that started. And it has been a fight with the insurance company, but it is underway and it actually like goes down to a cellular level to stop the replication of some cell that triggers lupus or something to that effect. So it is actually trying to address the root cause instead of just masking symptoms.
Nice. Okay. Well, we will continually praying for your health. All right. So let's dig in here to John. We are in starting at chapter 5 through 744. And the first thing out of the gate is Jesus healing on the Sabbath.
Right.
And we know he did it on purpose. I think Tim and I mentioned that. Yeah, he did it on purpose. There's no question.
Well, absolutely. I actually think that this particular question that he asks this man is one of the most profound questions that Jesus asks in the Bible. Do you want to be healed? For me, he's not just asking this guy, like, do you want to be physically healed? Or do you, your whole self, your whole being, your whole soul, want to be healed?
That
So,
was
because he goes
obvious
on,
to that, like, the person standing in front of him, "Do you wanna be healed?" "No, I just decided to, like, search you out," or the woman that gets healed by touching the hem I pushed through people that I shouldn't have. I love where you're going with it of, "Do you wanna be healed in your whole self?" But wouldn't it be obvious?
I don't know, is it? Sometimes someone needs to ask an obvious question in order for it to, trigger something. I know that happened to me years ago, that someone had to ask me a very obvious question that I was like, huh, I hadn't really thought about that. It could just, of course, of course, this guy wants to be physically well. He can't make it to the pool. He wants to. Why? I think Jesus is asking a deeper question.
I like it. Interesting. I do like the fact that later on, and we've seen this a couple times before, where Jesus finds the person later. And it's interesting that so it says later, this is verse 5:14. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you." So the implication is that he had sinned, which has caused this in the first instance.
hmm
Whereas I don't know that that's said of others.
This kind of is interesting because sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. People could take that as sin causes, certain like physical ailments or, whatever that in this instance, it could be he was drunk and fell out a window. That was a sin. This was, his punishment. And so he's like, Jesus is like, hey, you know, maybe make better choices and you might not end up crippled again.
Yeah, well, I do feel like it infers that there was sin that caused it by saying do not sin anymore.
What I'm getting at is like some people think that um, when bad things happen, it is because someone has done something wrong, and that's not always the case.
Sure, but in this particular case, he's telling him don't sin. Whereas there's another instance where they say, "Lord, why has this man been born blind? And did he sin or does his parents sin?" And Jesus' answer to him is, "For the glory of God, sin isn't always the source." And yet here,
hmm
when Jesus is seeing it, there is sin as a source. I feel like, but you're saying that
Well, yeah,
because it's here, it's still telling you that in other places it might not be.
right. And just like with the adulteress, he says, "Go and sin no more." So obviously there was sin tied to that. I guess just pointing out that there is a difference. That sometimes sin does have negative consequences, but sometimes sin isn't involved in someone's crappy situation.
Right. I think that's very valid.
So I really like that how when the Jews were like, "He's healed on the Sabbath," Jesus responds, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." So Jesus even says, "God is working on Sabbath, so I am too." Because then he follows up, like, "I am doing what my Father is doing," and so God is always working. Then I am also always going to be working.
I don't think he's saying God is working on the Sabbath. I think he's saying God is moving, God is doing. That doesn't mean that God doesn't rest to me, because the whole point is this is a child of God that deserves to be healed, and healing in correlation to working on the Sabbath. Like, we get pedantic about things as humans. Well, it says don't work, so I can't turn on a light switch. What? That doesn't make any sense. And yet, and here's someone that needs healing, and the healed man picks up his mat and walks. But the walking is the part, like, you're healed. The healing is the action, and yet they're all about, well, you're not supposed to walk with your mat. And they just lose sight of the big picture of healing. And so I love when he says, my father is still working, but I think it's a little bit more subtle to me in that the Sabbath was made for man, not for man to serve the Sabbath. And that's the thing. It's like you become a slave to a set of rules as opposed to truly resting in good and healthy amounts of work.
My point was that if God is still, working and doing good and, taking care of his people, even through the Sabbath, whatever, Jesus is saying, I'm still going to be doing that too. I'm going to be working and healing people. I don't think that it was necessarily like Jesus is going and whittling stuff, because,
Right. Right.
like, but God does not rest from taking care of us. And Jesus is
Right.
saying that I'm not going to rest from taking care of you.
Absolutely. Totally agree. My next thing is in 25.
Okay.
I think this is a foreshadowing, maybe. Maybe not necessarily little season, but possibly. And those who hear will live. And if you read it and you read it with this lens, you think, oh, he's saying that people who are dead because they don't believe in the Son will hear him, hear his preaching, see a miracle, believe in him, and then they have life. But I also think that this is an interesting one where we get into all these questions about first death, second death. When does this happen? Does Jesus go to Hades to free the captives that are there, even though they're not destined for hell? It's all very confusing and questioning, but I like it because it's sort of like
Yeah.
the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God. Maybe he gets them out of there.
Yeah, I was actually I highlighted 28. Says, "Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out."
Yeah,
And so that was again, yeah, first death, second death, all of that stuff. How does this work out? Because people prior to Jesus certainly shouldn't be damned to hell just
right.
because they hadn't actually met the Messiah yet. So,
Yeah.
and I
It's an
also thought that
interesting.
I don't what is
Go ahead. Go
in
ahead.
29, mine says, and come out, those who have done good to the resurrection of life. What does yours say?
I'm in NRSV currently, and it says, and will come out those who have done good to the resurrection of life.
Okay. And those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment.
Oh, I have
Okay. I
condemnation.
just wanted to see. Okay. Well, same thing.
And you're
So,
in ESV today?
yeah.
Okay. Condemnation, judgment. See, again, which I don't think is changes the meaning significantly, but some of the versions do. I don't
Can I close that?
necessarily remember which one I read because I flit about from all the different versions, because that's the whole point, is that we have insight when we have more than one version and don't limit ourselves. At least that's my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I have something again in 39.
Oh, I highlighted that too.
Ooh, tell me yours.
It says, "You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life, and it is they that bear witness about me. Yet you refuse to come to me that you may have life." And I just made a note that says, you can read the Bible all you want. Salvation is not found in the Bible, it's found in Jesus. And so the Bible points us to Jesus, but salvation is not found in,
The book, exactly.
yeah,
The
in the book
salvation is
itself.
found in him, because I loved how in the Altered Bible Review, it was pointed out that books are actually a form of media. And that really struck me because I hadn't thought of it about that way, because I thought of holy scriptures, right? The words of God. And yet it's literally just another form of media, the same as we in today's society understand media, because that's how you could have captured what happened then. And it's fascinating to me, especially as we're going that way in the Bible, and the descriptions of the temple and what they look like and the stuff like that. It's giving the best descriptions that they can in a written form, and you could then reproduce some of that. How many gopher pieces did the ark take? And obviously that's a ways off yet, but just that kind of thing, and you and I have had this study of what's bitumen, right? And
Right.
trying to figure out all that stuff. But we have descriptions of it, and yet it's still only just a form of media. It's just capturing it, what was like,
Mhm.
best they can.
That is an interesting concept because it really is. And it also lends to the thought process of the Bible is also not supposed to be idolized.
Right. And I think we do that a lot today in modern times. I think we do. And again, obviously, I do love the Bible. I'm reading it to people. Of course, I love the word and I love what it says, but I love him more. The Bible itself is just a pathway into helping give understanding about him. And yet the Holy Spirit can do that more because the Holy Spirit is the person. And so I think that we tend to get stuck in the scripture and whichever version you're reading. Again, for me, I'm loving having a phrase by phrase translation along with a word for word translation. And it doesn't matter which one of the two or three in either camp, but if I have both and I marry them up, I then have a fuller picture of what is being said and a different perception of it.
In 5, I highlighted 45. Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, on whom you have set your hope. I was like, oh, this is like one of those people that he's like one of the first people we learn about in Sunday school and whatever. And here, Jesus is actually Moses can condemn you because that law is there to prove that you're sinners. And so there's your condemnation. I don't think I'd ever caught that before.
It's a good one. You're reading along and you sort of expect him to say your accuser is Satan. And then he says, "No,
Hmm.
Moses." And you go, "Whoa, dude." Yeah, it's quite good. Okay. In 6, he said this to test him. And I love the fact that John's gospel was written after. It wasn't written right away, and it's not one of the synoptic gospels. So it's a little bit different than the other gospels. And so he adds some details in here that sort of foreshadow and tell the story from after it all happened, like, long after it happened, and I think that that's kind of an interesting one, but basically, he's telling you what's going on. He's narrating a little bit of the story, so he said it to test him, and I once heard a preach years ago that the types of baskets that they would have had there because of what they did and where they were would have been these huge baskets that took 2 men to lift and had even, like, a shoulder kind of holster thing to carry it, and so it would have been, like, smacking them on the way down the mountain as they were collecting all these baskets. Filled 12
That's
baskets
interesting.
that were left over, so just put 16, the walking on water, I just kinda highlighted that whole section. He just did it because he could.
Wouldn't you? Jesus has a sense of humor. I mean, I would just go traipsing up to my disciples, and be like, "Hey guys," I totally do that. Yeah, I really wonder just really how humorous Jesus was.
Yeah,
He
that
had to have
he
been
how
so
much he
funny.
laughed and yeah, totally.
It's just a very obvious one. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him God the Father has set his seal. And then he goes on to say, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you bread from heaven, but my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. Then they say, Sir, give us this bread always. And then Jesus replies, I am the bread of life. And while this is something that I've always known, for some odd reason, this really stuck out this time where Jesus is being so blunt. Like, it isn't just being like, I'm the bread of life. He's like, no, I am. Like, he's being very forthcoming in who he is in this moment in time. And I really feel like over all these years, I've, I've lost the awe-inspiring aspect of Jesus because when you're raised in church, there's a lot of stuff that kind of becomes cliche. And, you hear that he's the bread of life. You hear these things. But sometimes when you read them, it just kinda hits you different in different seasons of life, and that kinda did that for me today. So,
Nice. I love that. I did highlight 35 as well, and what's funny is I was actually thinking about it. There's that whole section of where he's like, "Eat my flesh, drink my blood," and you kinda go, "Ew, what?" It gets a
yeah,
little
I was
weird,
like,
right?
"Oh." I was like, "Is
Yeah.
that where the Catholics get that from?"
Well, it just kinda comes across as weird, and he's constantly saying, "I am in my Father, and my Father is in," and it's like your brain just kinda can't. I guess maybe motherhood is the best way that we can conceptualize that, and even Nicodemus goes, "Well, do I have to enter my, like, how do I what?" And so here, whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and we, with this flesh suit on, can't conceive. Many of us have fasted before, and you kind of, "Oh, okay, well, it's a little bit of a struggle, it's kind of unpleasant," but usually it's not too terribly long. You know that I've done some longer fasts, and I'm not it's not that's not what it's about. But at the same time, you think like I'll never be hungry again? It's not when the idea of it is brilliant, but it's not one that gets us too stuck, and yet if you sit there and ponder it, you go, "Well, I like eating. Food is good. My taste buds like eating. My taste buds like things that aren't good for me, like Krispy Kremes, like, that's not healthy to eat. That should never pass my lips, but my taste buds like, yeah, baby." So and yet if you had good healthy organic meal cooked by Ben, which hopefully we can all experience in Missouri in April, when something has been truly grown and curated in a way that is the way it was intended, I think it would be better than the Krispy Kreme.
Hmm.
Anyway, I know what you mean about it striking you, but to me it struck me in the different way, I guess. Not in a profound way. Like, it is profound, but it was more like, hungry, yeah. I don't know. Like, it'd be cool to not be hungry and to have to be or to be thirsty, like those things, and yet I kind of like when you get your thirst quenched, when you've gone out and
Hmm.
you're on a horseback ride or something, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't fill the canteen enough, or I didn't bring one," or whatever, and you get back and you're like guzzling the water. It's so good. It's so
Right.
rewarding to your flesh, and he's saying that's what he's like to our souls. And I think it's hard for us
Hmm.
to conceive of that.
I agree. But, we do get those moments of where we are truly completely satisfied, and they're so good, even though, but because we're human, they're fleeting, right?
Right.
But we do get
Yeah.
those moments, and so we do get those little tastes earth side that eventually will fully taste forever, which I can't even fathom that.
Right. You get
So,
this like 2 or 3 minute thing of where a mother giving birth and holding this baby in her arms, or a wedding or a marriage or something, in this moments, right? But they're very fleeting.
the next thing that I highlighted was 9. Jesus said these things in the synagogue. Like, that is, he wasn't just like sitting down with people chatting about these things. He was standing in a synagogue. Like, this was so beyond blasphemous. Like, it wasn't just chit chat between friends over dinner. Like, he is standing in a holy place saying, I am
Yep.
he.
Yeah. Well, it
So,
was quite an announcement. It wasn't the Samaritan woman at the well who's the first one that heard it. He's making waves.
see, and that's why we are not meant to be cowardly lions. Like, if we are really to embody Jesus, we are supposed to be kings of the jungle. We are supposed to be bold, and I mean, it is so sad and unfortunate how many Christians just either don't know their scripture well enough, don't know Jesus well enough, don't know something well enough, or too scared or something that keeps them from proclaiming the word of God so boldly. I mean, man, fear sucks.
It does. Well, how many times? There's 360, it's one per day. Do not fear, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. And we get too caught up in being hungry and thirsty. We get too caught up in what we're doing and where we're going and all the things. And it's like, okay, well, and how am I going to fix my car's noise? And how am I going to be able to afford this thing that I need, a new washing machine or something? I don't know if I would know how to hand wash my clothes if we had a river nearby. I don't know if I could do that. I would certainly try. And you just imagine, okay, well, we've lost so much connection to the earth, land, and homesteading and that kind of stuff. And yet even hunting and shooting an animal and skinning it and eating its meat, or fishing and taking the fish and gutting the fish and things like this. And so we're so far away from those things. I think it's difficult because we're so concerned with our modern stuff, like whether our car works or our washing machine. And I don't think having your car to work or getting a washing machine are bad things. This isn't, well, I need to have a deluxe washing machine, or I need someone to wash my clothes for me. Like, we're not even talking about that, right? And yet, I don't know if I would be able to sidle up to the stream and get the clothes clean. Oh
Dude,
goodness.
I would throw a fit over going to a laundromat.
Right? We're so spoiled. Yes. Anyway,
Seriously, I can't believe I just admitted that on the internet. Anyway,
but after the brothers had gone to the festival, then he also went. I love it that he's like kind of he's not being sneaky. He says, "No, no, not going. It's not my time." And yet, obviously, from one point to the next, the Lord said, "Nope, get up and go." And so oftentimes we feel like, well, God said go. And maybe he says, well, go 10 steps. And then all of a sudden he says, jump beside that rock and then go. And who knows whether I'm obviously giving a metaphor to a more David type of situation where you're having to dodge someone and being chased in a warlike situation. But as we tread, we often get frustrated by, oh, I was told to go forward and now I'm going backwards. And you go, what? But that's sometimes how he does things.
Well, sometimes we have to go back to kind of relearn something maybe we forgot that we've already learned once and we let slip, and God knows I did that just a couple years ago, and had to relearn like, "Oh, yeah, that's not good for me either. Let's move on."
Right.
Um,
Right.
so at 12, he said, "While some said he is a good man, others said, no, he is leading the people astray. Yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly to him," which is very interesting that even so, Jesus arrives kind of, you know, through the back alley, and then people are like, "Well, we're not actually gonna, we're not talking with this dude because potentially bad juju here." Um, and then down in 15, it says, The Jews therefore marveled, saying, How is it this man has learning when he has never studied? So we have documentation that Jesus was in the synagogue at 13 carrying on very theological conversations. And they're saying that he's never studied. So clearly they already have this system of, in order for you to be a teacher, or in order for you to really know anything about Torah, or the ways of Jews or whatever, that you actually have to go through an education system to be considered learned. So I think that that's really interesting how they've heard Jesus preach all these years, and yet they're just still amazed that he doesn't have any education. So how does he know all of this?
Well, he doesn't
And
have
that is
any
something
letters
that's
at the end of his name.
right. And it's funny because it's still like that today. They're like, you know, you have no reason to be saying anything because where's your degree? Where's your whatever? But God has made it very plain throughout scripture that it doesn't matter where you come from. You have the ability to hear and see and know, and your job is to pass that on. The
Indeed.
other thing that I marked down was in 23, it says, If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's body whole, or a man's whole body well? It's kind of interesting because Jesus is like pointing out that you literally take a part of a man and it is not
A
considered a
sin.
sin
Right.
according
And
to
yet I
Moses'
make a
law.
man whole.
However,
Yeah.
he's like, what logic is that, guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
So moving us over to Ezra, I underlined in verse 2 Zerubbabel, because somewhere in the Apocrypha, I can't remember if it was the Book of Wisdom or if it was in Sirach itself or whatnot, but there is a Hebrews Hall of Fame esque type thing, and it talks a lot about Zerubbabel. And I don't think that we know as much without those pieces about Zerubbabel. And I just thought it was kind of interesting that he's kind of highlighted here. And then my next one is over at the end with the joy and the weeping being confused, like at the same time. Like there's some people who were probably, I don't know, maybe like 10 or 12 or something when they saw it as children. They saw the temple and then they went into exile and they're back and they're seeing this again and they're crying over it versus everybody's like, this is amazing. And it's just kind of both things at the same time.
Yeah, most of what I just highlighted was about them keeping the feast and the festivals and how it is intended to be forever, which is obviously something that I have grappled with over several years. Of there's no ending point to honoring the biblical feasts and festivals. Nowhere does it say once Jesus comes, this is.
Yeah.
However, one thing that stuck out this time, but it was very specific to the people of Israel. So I don't think I'd ever caught that before.
Just in 5, the only thing that I highlighted there, I found it really interesting the first time I went through this. It kept saying in some versions, beyond the river. It's at the province beyond the river, and quite a few versions have that. But that was one of the ones where the phrase for phrase translations helped me a little bit more. And I was just sort of like, I know what it means. Okay, because this is all from the perspective of the Babylonians, because it's beyond the river for them is where Jerusalem and Israel is located. And I thought it was kind of interesting that we're flipping this, that here in the Bible, we're talking about the province beyond the river because it was called that because they are in exile. Therefore, it's from the Babylonian perspective.
That is something that I've been kind of learning is trying to zoom out, but also zoom in from the author's perspective, the reader's perspective, all of that stuff, because it really does make a difference logistically. Just like who's crossing the river, which direction are we
Right.
going?
Right.
Those things it matters in a very small, weird way. It matters. So
Absolutely.
then also I make a decree that if anyone alters this edict, a beam shall be pulled out of his house, and he shall be impaled on it, and his house shall be made a dunghill. My
They
word.
don't mince words, do they?
So in 7, I also have, for Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord. So 7:10, and do it and teach his statutes and rules in Israel. I found it interesting how it had repeated several times throughout what we've read. This is the type of heart God is after.
Mm.
Um, and so it's kind of like if you are looking to please God and you are looking to, honor God in all that you do, we need to be paying attention to, some of these characters and their character. So it was Ezra's heart that God was reading, and his heart was to study the law of God and then further teach it, which is, usually only attributed to like the New Testament, really. Like, go and make disciples, right?
Yeah.
But here Ezra's doing the discipleship work.
I just felt like there was an interesting connection. I mean, obviously, Ezra is there at the same time as Nehemiah, and they just like Kings and Chronicles have a priestly perspective versus a quote unquote kingly perspective. I'm not calling Nehemiah a king, but Nehemiah was governor at some point. But he comes from the more political aspects of it, and Ezra comes from the priestly aspects of it. But there's both are
Mhm.
important, and I thought that was kind of significant.
And in 21, I said, whatever Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of God of heaven, requires of you, let it be done with all diligence. Again, that's a character thing and something that we're specifically called to do for God, to work with it at all your heart. That diligence, and Paul talks about restraining your body and disciplining your body, like it all connects. Um, and so these character traits that we are so quick and easy to jump over, they're very important, and they help us lead a
Well,
better Christian
and
life.
and with David, right? The Lord constantly talks about how David loved him and never fell away, and it's like David like had an adulterous affair and then murdered the husband. Like what? And it's like no, David loved me. David was at, and it's like okay, his behavior wasn't very good at a certain point here, and yet it's about the character of his heart, and then he has the census and he does some stupid stuff. And even what's funny, the character of Joab, as you well know, is a favorite of mine, which again, we're gonna get to all this as we go along, but it's Joab who is kind of a low down, dirty kind of scoundrel. Like he does some stuff that is totally inappropriate. And yet he's the one going, David, why are you counting? Like what? What do you want me to do? Don't make me count. And this is the other sin
Mhm.
that David commits. And yet God is what you're talking about is looking at David's heart and his character. And his character, in spite of those sins, had so much more love for God that it eclipsed anything else that he did.
Yep. What does Paul say? That grace abounds in sin. Is that how it is?
Yeah.
Yeah. And David's a great example of that.
He is indeed, but we're still in Ezra. We'll get there.
Yep.
I
So
had an early 8. I love he's like getting everybody ready. He's got them by the river Ahava, which means love in Hebrew. And I found none of the Levites, none of the descendants of the Levites. And you kind of go, what's going on? Why are there no Levites? It's just sort of funny. And then he's like, I basically need some Levites, and these good fellows come along. In 26, there's this whole description of weighing out all the things and, keeping track of all the money and all the gold and all the stuff. But here's the kicker. All the stuff that got carried off by Nebuchadnezzar gets returned. There's a
mhm.
restoration down to the pans and shovels in the temple. And that's significant to me. God has never been unfaithful. Israel was unfaithful. We are unfaithful humans to the God that we serve. He keeps his half of the covenant always. Constantly, it's like, "Okay, if you will obey me, if you will this, if you will follow me, if you will do this, then I will bless you." Even when they go into exile, they turn from their ways and they bend and they say, "Lord, help." And he does.
Well, isn't it in Nehemiah that God says that he'll restore to them the lost years?
Yeah.
Like, it's incredible how much grace God has for us despite like the millions of times we run away and mess up and then like literally reject him and we're just like we're going to do our own thing later and he's like but come back and we'll fix it. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
The last 2 chapters of Ezra is focusing on this whole issue of marrying foreign wives and putting them away. You do have, like, a moment where you feel you're like, "Oh, poor wife," and yet this is the same thing as Laura Sanger talks about this, the word haram, and getting rid of the Canaanites and kill all the women and children, all the animal, hamstring the horses, and I'm like, "Oh, no." But it's the pollution of the land and the peoples and whatnot, and it needs cleansing, and you see the ramifications of that later on where they don't get it done and there's always problems.
Well, I mean that it goes all the way back to also not mixing linens and how you're not supposed to mix your crops and all of these things, and it's because we are designed to stand out, we are designed to be set apart, and so God doesn't want us becoming one with the world. We're supposed to be one with him.
I thought I'm just gonna jump right in there too. It's Second Chronicles 2, but it says Solomon conscripted 70,000 laborers. But this actually is a foreshadowing of a problem. It's just one of these random little comments, little side, he conscripts them to help and work and whatever. Well, that actually trips Rehoboam, his son, up later on in a significant fashion, which we'll get to in a couple weeks. But I found it funny. It's like it's just a little tidbit here in Second Chronicles 2, but later on, and not later on because we're reading that way, but it does. It becomes a big, big issue for Rehoboam.
In 8, I said, and Solomon said to God, you have shown great steadfast love to my father, love to David, my father. And I just made a note that it's a generational blessing.
Good one. Yep.
And then in 10, I just have more, Solomon's prayer of like, give me wisdom now and knowledge. God answered, because this was your heart, you have not asked for possessions, wealth, honor, or the life of those who hate you. I made a note that, again, I said, are we humble enough to not ask God for things, but only more knowledge of him?
That's very good. Although I feel like Solomon did himself a disservice because at the end it's the wives and the women that led him astray, whereas became so smart and yet it's the women that tripped him up. And that's the devil being a weenie because he says, "Oh, okay, he's got all these blessings. He's so smart. What can I trip him up with?" Well, his wives and his, "Oh, honey, I just need a temple to Ashtaroth over there, please. Please, dear. Come on. I won't you don't have to do anything with it. I just need it." And you can just imagine this dripping wife like asking for this stuff.
hmm I mean, it is kind of funny because people always neglect to remember that Satan is continually watching us. He is watching for our weaknesses and he knows us very well. And he knows where we're strong and he's not gonna tempt us in areas that we're strong. Like why would he? If we can resist that, he's not gonna go there. But if he's watching us, he's like, that's it. That's a weakness, whether it be sex, drugs, whatever it is, lying, stealing, it doesn't matter. He is going to
Judgment,
throw out
greed,
those
malice.
temptations.
Yep. Because you named a bunch of seeable sins. And I think that it's
Right.
a very interesting thing where we often say, "Oh, well, such a goody two shoes who's never done a drug, who's never committed adultery, who's never been drunk." And yet we're all sinners. And so there could be their heart is not in the right place. I have some notes in 3 and 5.
I have a note in 2.
Okay, go for your note in 2.
Again, there is more the feasts and festivals, but in 6 it says, "But who is able to build him a house, since heaven, even highest heaven, cannot contain him?" And I just wrote down like that's the immensity of God, that not even the highest of heavens can contain him.
Well, and you think that it's like hundreds of years later, Solomon sets out to build a temple, which is what David wanted to do because they've gotten to Jerusalem and they've gotten to the place, and God does choose Jerusalem, and it's like, okay, well, why? What was the spot like, and he's trying to drive out the Canaanites, and Abraham wandered all around there. And yet it's then David going, "Oh my gosh, God's in a tent and I'm in a house." And that's genuinely, like we were talking about earlier, the character of David, and that's just it. His character goes, "Wait a second, this doesn't jive." Like, yeah, maybe God doesn't get cold or hot, but at the same time, he's in a tent and I'm in a house.
Mhm.
I liked you talked about a generational blessing, and skipping over to chapter 5, it says, "Thus all the work that Solomon did for the house of the Lord was finished. Solomon brought in the things his father David had dedicated." So, teamwork. So, it's not just David does everything he's told that he can't build it, but he does everything else that he possibly can to prep so that Solomon doesn't have other than building anything else to do. And so the things that David dedicated, Solomon then brings in.
Mhm. I also really like down, I'm gonna jump into 6, let's see, verse 10, "For I have risen in the place of David my father, and sit on the throne of Israel, as the Lord promised, and I have built the house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel." And so I made a note that Solomon knew he'd be king, and he'd still stayed humble in his spirit. So he knew that he was going to get this passed on to him, and yet he still maintained his humility through all of it. He didn't get haughty. He didn't like be like, "Well, I don't have to worry about anything because I'm getting it anyway." He knew it could be taken away.
Yeah. Well, he trusts in the promise. I also love that in at the very end of 5, just to go backwards for one sec, the cloud. For the he is good, his steadfast love endures forever. And that's a phrase that as a Christian you hear over and over and over again. And yet what this is the priests couldn't stand because there's a cloud, the glory of the Lord. And Elijah runs away from the prophets of Baal again, something foreshadowing that we'll get to, but it's this small quiet, and that there's all this stuff surrounding God passing by, lightning and thunder and things. We can't conceive of the highest heaven that cannot hold God, right? So we did like who or what is God? And Jesus became a man because we don't understand the depth and breadth of God. And that we can conceptualize Jesus. I can go to 7.
At the very end of 6, I just highlighted in 40, "Now, oh my God, let your eyes be open and your ears attentive to the prayer of this place." I love that. I don't know why I love it so much, but I just love it. And then in the beginning of 7, um, it is talking about the fire that came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offerings and all of that craziness. I just kind of like outlined that paragraph, and I was like, can you imagine seeing that?
Well, do you know what's funny to me is it makes me think of Bel and the dragon. And Daniel and the king, the Babylonian king, because it's not the dragon isn't Bel, which again still always confused me, but this god that they're worshiping. No, no, no. Look at the footprints. Look at what's going on. And yet this, like you put a sacrifice on the altar and a fire comes down. What? Like yeah, that would be seriously, you'd have your mind blown. Watch it, seeing that.
Yeah.
Legit. Well, and of course, we have to point out 14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. And this is exactly the promise of when you've gone into exile and you've screwed up, you can call out to him.
In 10, I just highlighted the end of the sentence. Joyful and glad of heart for the prosperity that the Lord had granted to David and to Solomon and to Israel his people. The joyful and glad of heart for the prosperity.
It's a good one. Flipping over to chapter 9, or the end of 9,
We don't have
rather.
much in 9.
Okay. I just love the comment that 927, the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, which again, we can't conceive of. You can't conceive that everything was made of gold and that silver was so prolific that they didn't even count it or they couldn't weigh it. Like, that's just sort of
Right.
kind of again, small, minor detail that's not significant. And yet that's actually a big deal that silver wasn't even important to them. And then, of course, in 10, we have none other. Then Jeroboam, son of Nebat. This guy, he gets so blessed and so screws up. And then every time after that, you hear this king of Israel like, and he committed the sins where Jeroboam, son of Nebat, led Israel away. And it echoes a
Hmm.
lot as we, again, this is a foreshadowing backwards, sort of weird. It's been the bizarrest thing, but so fascinating for my mind to have read it in this way rather than forwards. It really has. You just finally looking at things through a different lens. So I loved it.
I like how in 15 it notes, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by God that the Lord might fulfill his word. So while he uses the evil in his own favor, which again aligns with the whole like what Satan meant for evil, God will turn. Like I love the cross referencing that so seamlessly happens between Old Testament and New Testament. So then again, we can just see repeatedly that God's promises are true from one generation to another to another.
Yep. What the enemy intended by murdering Jesus, God just used. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I thought of Tobit because at the opening of Tobit, I think it's Tobit. I didn't look it up. I should have. He talks about having gone have he was an Tobit was an Israelite that went into exile, and yet at some points he went to Jerusalem because he was a righteous Israelite, not one that was following after other gods. And I found it interesting. It's 13. The priests and Levites who were in all Israel presented themselves to him from all their territories. And then it carries on, but it basically it's like he makes these golden calves, and there are people in Israel who are still worshiping God who look at Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and go, "No, dude, that's no good. And then they end up going over to Judah and Benjamin to continue worshiping the Lord.
Well, in 12:14 it says, "And he did evil, for he did not set his heart to seek the Lord." Again, we're back to the heart.
Yep. Well, and I think in 15 it talks about written in the records of the prophet Shemaiah and the seer Edo. Who are they? What is that? What are we missing?
Mhm.
Right? There is so much missing.
I noted that too.
Well, as to quote our favorite Scotsman, it's a good canter.
Yes, indeed.
We'll see you again, my dear.
All right, next time.